them and says, my pronouns are he, him. And there was this one particular instance where he was going to childcare, and there was an NVQ student, a teaching student, somewhere from the local college or university doing a placement in school that he hadn't met before. So he wanders over and says, hello, miss, my pronouns are he, him, and was like, hey, this is me. And this person turned around and said, my name is Maxter. I can't remember the name, but Maxter Sam Yabbleswacky. And then it was Maxter, so what are the pronouns are for that? And so the pronouns are they, them. I said, okay. So do I call you Maxter? Do I call you teacher? Or do I call you Sam? For argument's sake. And the teacher overheard this conversation and asked my son about it. And he was so impassioned that he explained to the teacher why it's so valuable to request people's pronouns, because then you can address them correctly. And this child was 4, very nearly 5. And the long story cut short is that on the school enrollment for persons coming in for employment or for people going in from school, they've changed the sex category to pronouns because they weren't capturing people's pronouns. And this is something which in today's world you'd like to think that they'd capture, rather than just the same form from like 40 years ago that hasn't been changed. And whilst it's my son who's instigated this change, I am so proud of the fact that he stood up against a teacher and a teaching assistant in full view of his class to demand change.
How
Not
old
for
is
himself. He was 4 at the time. Not to demand change for himself, but to demand change for others, so that other people could receive and be respected in the way that is important for them. And yeah, major mum moment was going on right there.
It's a beautiful story that will impact those children in the class and the adults for the rest of their lives. When there's knowledge like that comes from the children, it's so profound that,
I've had feedback from several people where it's he asks for pronouns and he switches fluently between them. So if he's speaking to someone and their pronouns are they, them, he flips straight into it. And never been prouder.
You've never been prouder yet. It sounds like he's going to be a fabulous young man. These stories are just brilliant, and who wants to go next? Come on, Shirin, Sean.
I'll go next. It's fine.
Okay.
I don't know too many disruptor stories of myself, but I want to just say that's a beautiful story, because this is something that's so key to me as well, because as a pregnancy coach, I really want to empower women to be able to be disruptors in the same way that you were teaching your child, and then they go on, because that's the knock-on effect, isn't it? So yeah, I do. I suppose as a nurse, I was always a disruptor, and I would always start and change new things that would be new policies that would be happening in hospitals. But one that I do remember when I first came here was I just happened to work in one of the private hospitals, which was pretty notorious at the time. And it was like stepping backwards in time. Nothing really had shifted and changed. It was the same thing. And, we would have a bell call us. A particular person would arrive every day, come in to see their patient, and then they would just say yes, and walk out. Yes, walk out. And we would deal with the entourage of this situation where nobody would fight them. No one would have a discussion with them that, hey, maybe it's a lot of our clients were getting really confused post-operatively. So I thought, no, we've got to do something. And Paulette said something which was really important. You've got to get the stats. If you want to make change, somewhere along the line, you do need to have stats. And I made it my business to go and get the stats of all the surgeons, particularly of all their patients. and basically had a look at what was happening, but none of them got confused except for one particular doctor. And I thought, well, I'm going to speak to this person, but I realized that I couldn't do it just by hearsay. So I went and got all the information, and then I just quietly, one morning, he came in and I said, I want a word with you. And of course he said, oh. And he came and sat down. He came and I said, look at all these things over here. And I look at all the reports of this. And this is what I think's happening. And he looked at me and he said, how come nobody has ever told me this? Because of the nature of how things are set up. And there's the hierarchy and the fear of there's this hierarchy of different structures. This is what happened. And I think what happened was I did something completely different. And he changed. He basically said, well, that's got to stop. And went and spoke to everybody around and sort of said, why didn't you tell me? Why wasn't this happening? He spoke to the anaesthetists, spoke to the nurses, spoke to everybody. And he actually changed his system, and he changed the system for all these NHS patients. So it really was an interesting dynamic. I didn't see all the consequences of it, but it was really nice to know that I was that person that was able to be there and make a shift without too much, actually. Just that quiet calling in, having the information, and just being very contained, I think. And I think that was where I kind of realized this is what, for me, leadership is to be able to hold that balance and be able to put your argument in a way that cannot be refuted, and at the same time give grace. And that,
please,
yeah, no, and it had such an effect with what his practice was, and then, as I said, the practice within the NHS.
I would like to say, as a former African-born lady, the understatement, the Britishness with which you've understated that enormous impact and unwavering seeking out of facts, and then cleverness to know that a man's ego needs to be massaged. Profound.
I just think that if you actually often speak to men with the same compassion and regard, and you are in your space, most educated and certainly well-meaning people will respond differently. I do believe that. So I was lucky. I wasn't in that kind of argument stage where I have had with some others, but this particular one, I was just totally different, and it was so interesting to see how that response was. Yeah,
fabulous.
And it did have a big change. Yeah,
amazing. Vicky, Vic, would you like to go next, or Sian, would you like to go next? One of you has to go next.
I might go next.
Lovely, Sian. Well, sorry, you've not spoken much this thing, so give us a juicy story or two.
Well, I'm sorry, I don't think I can deliver on a juicy story. And I think actually one that kind of came to mind for me initially is one well before I began my professional career, but back in school. When I was probably about 15, I wanted to play water polo, and we didn't have a women's water polo team. So I played on the men's team for a year until we had a women's team. But for that year, I worked really hard. I started in more games than not, and really tried to see myself as an equal player. And I think for me, it was a really big lesson in sort of what I was talking about before, where if you don't see the pathway or the opportunity doesn't exist for you, you need to create it. And just because it's not there, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't go for it or you shouldn't try to make something happen. So I think it's something for me that was like quite an early lesson in that I really could carry forward throughout my life and my professional career, in that just because it doesn't exist, it doesn't mean you can't create it. And sometimes, a lot of times, that's what it takes. Is you have to have that vision and be able to follow through and